Councilors. Go ahead and forward to the next slide. So this morning, our goals are to provide an overview of the supplemental process and the guidelines used, going over my recommendations for the council's consideration, obtain any feedback or questions that the council may have, as well in preparation for the public hearing next week. I do have members of the finance team, the budget team, and departments are also present this morning if there are specific questions that I'm unable to answer. So for the Spring Supplemental, the 2021 Spring Supplemental is an opportunity for the county to address immediate needs that can't wait till the Fall Supplemental and are not specifically related to urgent COVID-related matter or allocations. We do have those emergency budget supplementals specific for COVID. While there were several requests that have been submitted and some are not being recommended at this time, the intent is to look at many of the new funding requests, especially for those related to new positions and other ongoing expenses should be part of the regular annual budget and will be addressed in the 2021 budget. So part of the overview, so the RCW, just as a reminder, allows for supplemental budget appropriations as needed throughout the budget year. Specific situations where supplemental budget requests are warranted include any unforeseen situations that put the safety and welfare of the citizens of Clark County at risk, an unforeseen situation which hinders the ability of a department or office to fulfill statutory obligations that are imposed upon a department manager or elected official, labor contract settlements, legal settlements, and other judgments that exceed the amounts that we currently have available within the budget, and unforeseen revenue sources that are associated with expenditures such as grants. Just going over the timeline, departments and offices submitted their submissions on March 1st. We have the county manager develops recommendations. During that time, I did review all of these, individually. I read everyone. We met with all the departments who submitted to obtain clarity and feedback. And then I also met with the finance team as well to obtain their feedback on the submissions. The budget office for the supplemental received a total of 39 change requests from departments and elected officials. 10 of those were previously approved by the council, either in council meetings or council time. 5 are budget neutral. This type of change request recognizes revenues and the expenses, such as grants. There is 1 technical adjustment, and I'll go over these more specifically as we move forward in this presentation. There were no budget interventions this time. They were not asked for, and we did do that during the annual budget process, but during the supplemental, we did not request any of those. There are 2 carry forward packages that were submitted and 21 new requests. So going into the recommendations, 29 of the 39 packages that were submitted are being recommended to the council. 10 of these recommendations do have an impact to the general fund, but however, that impact is minimal, and I will show that here shortly as well. So this slide just shows the allocation of the different funds based on the submissions, on the recommendations. And then I'm actually going to do a quick summary of the submissions that are being recommended. Next slide, please. So for previously approved by the council, and you may remember these as all of these took your approval already, creating a fund for the Emergency District 1. This was approved in December. It allows the collection of the property tax revenue to be allocated into a separate fund. We did have a repayment of an internal loan from REIT 1 to REIT 2. As you remember, that specific decision saved the county over $260,000 in interest by paying off that loan early. There's a 24-month project position to implement supporting COVID funding programs in the community. Janitorial contract increases. We did do an RFP for that contract, and there were some associated increases with that. Cleaning services for a courtroom in response to COVID. Duct cleaning that's required for maintenance for our downtown campus, jail work center, Heritage Farm, and Center for Community Health. Security services, again, this was done through a competitive public process. The Event Center kitchen remodel, approving using reserve funds. This was approved in February to support our events with the concessions, catering, and alcohol out at our Event Center. Also previously approved was carry forward of one-time expense authority for fleet to complete the road ops hotbox equipment swap. And then continuing of a 3-year replacement project to update 4 courtroom recording devices, no longer supported by the manufacturer. There was one technical adjustment. The council had previously approved during a budget process allocating FTE to the correct funding in human resources. But at the time when we pulled the FTE for the FTE report that the council approves, this change had happened. So therefore, the previous the approved FTE report from the council was the decision prior to this approval. So this is just creating that technical adjustment to correct that moving forward. There are 2 carry forwards. There's one budget authority for CARES Act to use unspent grant funds from 2020. This is the utility bill assistance in the amount of $404,000. And there's also a carry forward of $300,000 approved in the Clean Water Fund to transfer to Conservation Futures Fund for legacy land property purchase. There was a project underway last year that wasn't complete, so that is the reason for this carry forward. Budget neutral, there were 5 budget neutral items. 4 out of the 5 are directly related to CARES Act or COVID-19. CJC received funding to help administer forensic interview services, the emergency rental assistance grant funding increase to get additional grant money from the state of $4.3 million. CARES Act grant providing funding assistance to those at the federal poverty level with their heating needs. That's about $84,000. Budget authority for the Community Development Block Grant Coronavirus, 3rd round of funds from CARES Act. This is business technical assistance, tenant-based rental assistance, case management, and rehab of healthcare clinics who service low-income residents in Clark County, and that's $1.1 million. The 5th budget neutral item that's being recommended is accepting the Administrative Office of Courts grant funding to increase their expense capacity in the amount of $21,000. With regards to new requests, there are 11 new requests that I am currently recommending. The first one is updating the 2021 budget for indirect cost allocation to match the amounts as calculated by the Auditor's Office. This brings our budget into alignment. It actually provides an additional $314,000 revenue to the general fund. I am recommending a revenue forecast update for REIT 1 and REIT 2. We were very conservative coming into 2021 with regards to revenue and kept it flat for this year. However, our actuals are a lot better than budgeted, so we are looking at updating the REIT 1 and REIT 2 revenue forecast. Clean water budget cleanup, there was a program coordinator 2 position that was eliminated, but again, with the FTE report that the council approves during the budget process, the timing of that position was still in there, so therefore the council approved that position. So this is actually deleting that position completely out of our budget. CRESA has some fees increases to the fire marshal, increasing the rates for radios and dispatch fees for customers. This is about $2,000 to the general fund, and this decision was made after the 2021 budget adoption. Indigent Defense has been awarded extra grant money for 2021 in the amount of $50,000. This will help cover the new courtroom deputy contract positions. They will assist with first appearances and other needs in Indigent Defense. There's a request to increase expense authority only, so not the revenue, just the expense. We have the money available to purchase servers and storage. This has already been collected. It's just getting the authority to actually spend that money. We have had a lot of increase in storage over the last 2 years. The PA's office has received a Stop Violence Against Women formula grant in the amount of about $74,000. This pays for a .75 deputy prosecuting attorney to improve the criminal justice system's response to violence against women. The PA's office is only requesting the revenue at this time. They do have the expense capacity. If you remember, we had a conversation this last year regarding a road sweeper that had caught fire, and the council did approve a $293,000 expense for Public Works to purchase a new sweeper. The reason why this is on a new request instead of a carry forward is that there were some tax miscalculations in the original quote, and so while we want to move forward the $293,000 that the council's already previously approved, we also need additional $11,000 to make that purchase whole. Also the council approved using park impact fees for updating the PROS plan. Upon further review, that we actually need to transfer that authority, that funding expenditure and capacity to the Metropolitan Parks District, as planning is not actually an eligible expense for the park impact fee. So it's just reallocating the funds that the council's already approved to the appropriate fund. Furthermore, in Parks and Land, they have recently implemented and realigned their department to create more unity between programs, reduce span of control, strengthening internal controls, so therefore ensuring more efficiencies. This is realigning the current budget to the FTE and the work that they're doing, so it accurately reflects the work being performed. And finally, the Sheriff's Office has submitted a request for purchasing and implementing body cameras and dash cameras. This request I am recommending to move forward contingent on funding. I will be going over the general fund 6-year forecast here shortly. We haven't solidified the funding and the revenue for this at this time, but I would like the council to consider moving this package forward so that we can continue to have conversations on the funding pieces as we move forward in that process. So there are a few items that are not being recommended at this time. 4 of the items are because they're COVID-related specific, and those will be addressed during the emergency supplemental with the rest of the COVID funding requests. Those include increased technology due to remote work and juvenile, funding temporary workers in food preparation, and this is in the jail, and that's an amount of $450,000. Due to the change in their population, they have less individuals that they can use for the food prep, so we're having to contract some of that out. Reducing in the jail bed revenues also due to the change in population, the revenue coming in is less. The Sheriff's Office did submit a $5 million reduction. I'm not recommending that right now, but I will show here shortly in the 6-year forecast that we're putting that number in already. There will be a reduction, and as the Sheriff's Office continues to monitor what that revenue loss is going to look like, we will be addressing this in a later supplemental this year. And then finally, the 4th one related to COVID is for Superior Court. They had to do a lot of mandated social distancing spacing requirements and remove some furniture. So they have a $11,000 request, which I will be considering and recommending during the emergency budget supplemental with the rest of COVID. There are a few also new legislations at this items at this time that I would not be recommending. One is in district court. There's a new law that's changing the requiring monitoring with victim notifications. Probation now must monitor when an individual enters restricted areas of a victim or protected party under the new law. In addition to that, their pretrial services has seen a population double in the last year. They are asking for 2 FTE. I'm not recommending this at this time due to our current general fund funding, but this is an item that will need to be addressed, and it will probably, if it can't wait till supplemental, it may be coming before the council in the separate staff report this summer. The second item that has new legislation is in Indigent Defense. They asked to add funds to fund a new mandate for creating a sobriety docket in the amount of $50,000. The reason why this is not being recommended at this time is that that program has not been implemented, and we don't have assurance that will actually be implemented in 2021. If it does, then we will come back to the council either in a staff report or in another supplemental budget and that dollar amount will also be prorated based on the timing during the year. This will be something that we'll have to address moving forward, but at this time it's not being used at this time, so we're not recommending it. And then finally, for the new legislation, Superior Court asked for increased budget capacity to accommodate new legislation mandate for court-appointed visitors and attorneys for parents and minors. Right now, I've asked them to use existing budget, and we'll look at the fall supplemental based on the current funding. I do believe that they also have received some funding for the first part of the year. They are looking at adding staff. It will be about $233,000 ongoing. There were two requests also that we're requesting for overtime and covering overtime. One is for the Sheriff's Office. They did have some savings in 2020 due to, for example, schools being closed. They were able to reallocate their school resource officers to help backfill some of their employees who are off. They are asking for a $1.6 million ongoing, I believe it's ongoing, overtime request. We will continue to monitor this throughout the year, and this will probably have to be trued up in the final supplemental later this year. But right now, we're going to ask the Sheriff's Office to continue using their existing budget capacity so that we can get a more firm number as we move forward. Superior Court also asked for overtime for judicial assistance. The judicial assistants are exempt from overtime. And while I know that judges are trying to do their due diligence in providing necessary lunch and breaks for these individuals, there are times during a trial or during court in which they can't, so therefore they're accruing overtime. I've asked them to continue to use their existing budget right now, and I am committed to working with the administrator and their judges to look at how we need to address this at the end of the year, as well as ongoing, and do analysis of the overtime and how much we actually need. Look at other options like, if an FTE can help cover that. I know that that can be tricky based on, the courts, and they're all individual support there. So this will be also a conversation that's coming back before the council later this year. And then finally, the last item that I'm not recommending right now is the Sheriff's Office has requested $100,000 in general fund for security fencing for the West Precinct parking lot. And what I would ask on this one is, just for consistency purposes, is to look at this during an annual budget process, because that is when the full requests for the year are considered across the county, so that I can see them, and so can the council. We can review them all at the same time. Okay, so here is the general fund forecast. One thing I want to, can you make that just a little bit bigger? Trying to blow it up here a little bit for you and for me, because I can't see very well. So just as a reminder, this is a snapshot. So this, I'm going to go over these line items just to make sure that we all understand where these are, but this is a point in time. This is always changing, and we update it regularly as we see things coming in, items that are being approved, being considered, new legislation. So this is a point in time. As you can see, the beginning fund balance was about $59.7 million. And I will say, you can see that that's pretty high compared to the other even forecasted fund balance. The reason why that was high is that was the CARES Act funding, the one-time funding that we had last year. The total budgeted revenue and expenses on there, the $178.8 million and the $186 million, those are the adopted budget that the council approved last November. Under the lavender other modifiers, the first line item is currently a House bill that's being considered up in Olympia. It's House Bill 1140. This will project property tax penalty and interest estimated loss. Working with the Treasurer's Office, they are monitoring this. At their best estimate at this time, there could be a potential $2 million loss in the general fund starting in 2022. If this gets approved, and as we move into next year, I know the Treasurer's Office will be actively monitoring this, and we will update these forecasts if necessary at that time. The next line item, the $5 million, this is the jail bed revenue loss. While I'm not recommending it right now, as we need to continue to monitor that funding and that revenue source, we do know that there is a loss due to the change in the population. The Sheriff's Office is estimating a $5 million loss. I believe right now their total revenue for jail beds is anticipated at $5.2 million. So we are recognizing that $5 million loss ongoing as well. The non-spendable encumbered invoices, this number is provided by the Auditor's Office, and this is to accommodate for known invoices that have not been paid yet. The assigned fund balance items, so this is the $25.4 million. I believe last week the council did adopt assigned fund balances, and this included items such as economic stabilization, general liability, ER&R, capital facilities. So that number can change. The council does have the ability to change those amounts moving forward, but we certainly want to recognize that on our current year budget. The revenue recovery, the COVID-19 and forecasted American Rescue Plan funds is $10.3 million. So $5 million of that is for the jail bed revenue loss. As you know, and Mark Gassler will actually be presenting later this morning at council time regarding that funding coming in from the federal government. But what's different with that federal government than with CARES Act is we can use it for revenue loss. So we have put in a placeholder for that revenue loss even though we have not received the funds. The rest of the $5.3 million in that line item is estimated revenue loss for 2020. And I can say that Mark and Larry are working diligently with all of our departments and offices, looking at every revenue stream that has come into the county and what has been reduced due to COVID, and that will be presented to the council as well for your consideration as we move through that process. So the two line items right below that are shaded in the lavender are what's being recommended today. As you can see, it's a pretty minimal amount to general fund. There's a one-time amount of $1,900, and the ongoing recommendation is $18,000. If you go down under the gray line, you can see our projecting ending fund balance with these recommendations is about $30.5 million. Our current minimum fund balance per policy will be about $30.3 million. This is based on an estimated approximately 60 days of expenses. So as you can see, with everything being recommended, our available fund balance for a new request is about $223,000. And I will share with a budget of over $180 million, that's a pretty tight cushion. And again, this does not include additional American Rescue Act funds that we'll be getting. And just a reminder to the council that that funding is a one-time only. That is not an ongoing funding. And then just speaking going forward a little bit on this, if you could scroll to the side, thank you. As I mentioned, for the revenue, we did project for this year a 0% increase. For 2022 and beyond, we are projecting our normal escalations. So for example, property tax with an increase of 2.5%, sales tax just over 4%, and then other modifiers moving forward. Also, the future years do not include the 1% property tax. That is a decision point that the council makes during the annual budget process, and we do not include that in our projected forecast. But if you were, the estimated amount for 1% is about $700,000. So as you can see, for 2022, if there are no new requests, which as you know, we always get new requests in our budget process, we are going to have to look for $4.3 million. That's how much right now, as of today in this point in time, that we're below our minimum fund balance is 4.3. And you can see that through 2026 increase as we move forward. Again, we will have that one-time funding coming in that will probably help us get through next year, but that one-time funding does not address the long-term structural deficit where our expenses have been exceeding our revenues. So I think we're going to have to continue to have some policy conversations on how to move forward to ensure that we have a balanced budget. I think that's all that I have right now. I am going to ask Emily from our budget office just to make sure I didn't miss anything that's key. So Emily, is there anything before I ask the council if they have questions on this that I missed?
No, I think it was well covered. Thank you.
Okay. So councilors, before I move on, is there any questions regarding the 6-year forecast?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Councilor Lentz.
Kathleen, I have a question about the $5 million ongoing jail bed revenue loss. So the $5 million for 2021 and potentially for 2022, these are reductions based on at the start of the pandemic when we reduced capacity in the jail. So putting fewer people in order to have social distancing, et cetera. And that makes sense to me. I'm curious about the ongoing nature of that reduction, because I hadn't heard a formal policy position from the sheriff, the prosecutor, the courts that that reduction would remain consistent.
Yes, and I know the sheriff is certainly on today as well. So the sheriff's office did submit an ongoing reduction. I do know at the beginning of the pandemic, it wasn't just about reducing, well, it was the original conversation was how do we keep our members of our community safe due to COVID. But there were policy conversations that the PA's office had with the sheriff and possibly the courts, and who should be incarcerated and at what level. And so I think based on their recommendation and those conversations moving forward, I would assume, and I will ask the sheriff's office to chime in, that that policy decision on who is going to be housed in the jail is a change that will continue moving forward. Under Sheriff, are you on?
Yeah, what I would like to add, Counselor, is that the problem is we really don't know when it's going to change. And so we just wanted to give a longstanding ability of ongoing to not count on that money because we don't know. A lot of it was a Department of Corrections contract that we had here where we would house a number of inmates for the Department of Corrections and they would pay a rate for us. And so since that's gone, and then the misdemeanants that come from the other cities is where we collected the money. And essentially because of COVID, the lack of people coming to jail for that we're holding is the issue. And as far as ongoing, it's really just because we don't know.
Okay, thank you. This is probably not a conversation necessarily for today, specifically with regard to the Spring Supplemental, but it strikes me that the decision to reduce the number of folks in the jail, well, it's one that I support. There's a lot of policy wrapped up in that and decisions that are being made through our law and justice across the county. And if we are simply projecting $5 million losses moving forward because we don't know what to expect, I think there's probably a smarter way for us to do our budgeting. If the sheriffs, prosecutors, and courts are making policy decisions to reduce our jail population in an ongoing way, especially because there may be attention paid to and things learned in the pandemic that can reduce incarceration as a part of how we deliver justice. I think that's a very interesting conversation and one that I'd like to hear more about as it's happening and certainly have the council participate in, because that also influences conversations about things like the jail and the future of the jail and that project. So I'll leave that there because again, it's not exactly about the Spring Supplemental, but looking at this forecast, I think while that isn't going to solve our structural deficit, it is something that we should have more conversations about as we project into the future. Thank you.
John, I was also under the impression that a court decision had something to do with deciding the not jail capacity, but those that would be incarcerated. Is that not the case?
No, very, very true. The judges, prosecutor got together and made a determination of who would be booked into jail. And again, that was basically due to the COVID issue.
Madam Chair.
But wasn't there a Supreme Court decision about possession?
Baker.
Oh, yeah. There is as Councilor Lent said, there's a lot of policy decisions that will be further down that we'll have to be looking at. And again, just for the sake of the budget, we just wanted to put this forward for now, just mostly to alert the county manager and the council of, we don't see this revenue returning anytime soon.
Okay, thank you. Councilor.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's the Baker decision, Madam Chair, that could potentially impact the jail bed days in the future. And I'll only make one more comment on that. I would hope that as we look at that number going forward, that we have some supporting data, like real bodies and people that we can count, and what types of misdemeanor charges are made versus felony charges, and have the data to support that number, so we've got some confidence in that going forward. But and that's really all I have. Everything else is really clear. So thank you, Kathleen.
Other questions of the council?
Madam Chair.
Councilor Brown.
Looking beyond the spring supplemental, and the county manager mentioned that this $222,000 in the general fund forecast is very tight. As you project that 6 years ahead, since this is a 6-year budget, that $222,000 becomes a minus 43 million plus. So it seems to me that this is the time to begin looking at that and figuring out what might we do from a policy perspective to change that, because clearly we don't have a general fund when we're looking at those kinds of numbers. I recall that Councilor Medvigi has spoken in the past with legislators about the sales tax loss in our county because of our proximity to Oregon. Maybe this would be a good time as we plan for the future to think about, would the 5 counselors like to join together and meet with our legislative body to show them these numbers with a 6-year forecast and make our case for some sales tax replacement?
Well stated. I agree. I think, this shows, this whole thing just really shows you definitely that the ongoing structural deficit, either we lower services,
Yeah,
and the expectation, or we ask our delegation to help us move forward with something that over time will help this deficit that we actually experience, because we are, like 2 minutes from shopping that takes place across the river. And so thank you for that. Other questions or comments?
And if I may, obviously, I strongly share what you both have just expressed. I really would hope that the entirety of the council would get behind some organized effort. I mean, from time to time, I've met with individual legislators and showed them the numbers and never really had any disagreement. But we have other counties as well from Pacific East that are impacted, just not to the extent that we are. I mean, we need to get organized. We need to have a unified front from our legislative delegation, and we need to reach out to those other counties that are at least impacted to some degree. So I fully support that effort moving forward to save our budget in its entirety in the out years. I want to just comment briefly on something Temple Lentz just brought up, because I may restate it in somewhat of a different way, but as a layperson prior to becoming a counselor, I never saw a jail as a source of revenue. From a non-accountant point of view, from a layperson's point of view, when I started seeing those numbers, I thought, wow, that's somewhat of an accounting trick. We used to look at other jails and prisons across the nation and say, well, who provides the lowest cost food per meal? Who provides the lowest cost daily rate to incarcerate someone? What is the cost per person to actually incarcerate someone? So I'm just restating, I think, what Councilor Lentz brought up. It's an interesting accounting methodology to treat a jail as and project revenue loss because of not having our full capacity of inmates. So I would like to look at that, at different accounting methods and how we move forward. Obviously, we want to provide humane incarceration. We want to provide as much in the way of jail alternatives across the board in the therapeutic courts and treatment. I mean, all of it is best practice being explored across the nation. So I'm not looking to increase incarceration, but I would like to look at the budget ramifications and how we treat these costs. I mean, there's a cost per inmate to house, and how that's paid for. I never considered it as revenue by other municipalities or the state prison system paying us to house their inmates. I think there's different ways of looking at this, and I certainly in the future would look forward to that, especially as we look towards our jail remodel, jail rebuild, what we project to be our ongoing and out-year prison inmate population locally.
Thank you, Councilor. I have, this is in the context of the jail as well. I am curious about the request. I'm just wondering, are you expecting the jail to use their current budget authority for the inmate food preparation?
So yes, right now, they have budget capacity to continue to pay for that, and then we will address that in the emergency supplemental with the rest of COVID items coming up, and that will probably be mid-summer.
Okay.
Early summer.
Okay, thanks. Other questions of the council or comments? Thank you, I think.
Okay, and I did want to add to, as I mentioned with the recommendation of the body cam and dash cams, again, I did ask the budget office to put in a revenue line to keep that net neutral for it to move forward and for me to still present a balanced budget for the council. So that is conversations and work that we would still need to move forward with that process.
Right, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, just a couple more slides. So this is for council and the community's information. The current reports that are run through for the budget, any budget process, individuals can find it on our county council meeting site, and that's the top right. There's a snapshot of what that screen looks like. And then also, if any community member has public input, this hearing will be next Tuesday night. So you can either submit a public comment or join in on our meeting next Tuesday night. After the adoption, whatever the council moves forward with, those reports then will be on the budget website moving forward. A couple of the reports that just notable that you'll see on those websites include the supplemental appropriation line item coding, the summary by fund and request, staffing changes, and then also the specific change requests that departments have submitted that actually provide the verbiage and the coding for that. So I think at this point that concludes this work session, unless there are any other questions from the council that we can answer, or if there's additional information that you would like prior to the hearing, we're open to hearing that.
Are there questions or further information that you would like to see or hear before the hearing?
Madam Chair, if I could,
Councilman,
I want to focus on Kathleen's kind of last comment before going off into the looking at the public webpage and what's effective there. And that's the body cam issue. I just want to make this comment. You know, we have no staff as legislators. You know, I could on my own take a walk like Hansel and Gretel through the budget to try to find the fluff, to try to find the program, to make a hard policy decision, to fund body cams. I think among all of our budget items for transparency, for trust, for the social unrest, we need to fund these body cams. And so I don't have any way to look. You know, I've always been putting out there, hey, let's be creative. We have this CARES Act funding. We have this Recovery Act funding. You know, this social unrest and body cams are not unseparated. You know, right now there's a strong nexus. You know, just as there's broadband is a strong nexus to the pandemic. You know, let's be creative and find solutions to use this federal money to fund some of our needs that have been aggravated by this pandemic. So absent that, because I haven't heard any, I haven't seen any, not for broadband, not for body cams. And so then we need to look at making hard policy decisions. Where are we going to find that money from? You know, we need to control the amount of ongoing sustainable costs, personnel costs. You know, do we really need 3 people? Do we really need 5 people in the sheriff's department? And by the way, now the PA is jumping on board that bandwagon. We need more prosecutors. Luckily, the court didn't say that. I think rightly so. We don't have a public defender, and our defense attorneys are saying, this is going to cost us more time. It's going to cost you more money. You know, so now we have all these other additional costs beyond what the sheriff's asking for. And, you know, from that point of view, I would say, you know, find it within your budget. This is a normal workload. It's just additional evidence. You need to figure it out without additional people. So we can control some of this as far as ongoing sustainable costs, but funding the program, making it sustainable, I think is among our highest priorities right now during this pandemic. And we need to find either across the board budget cost cuts across our general fund in order to pay for it, or find some programs that are less important and cut them. But the bottom line is I don't have staff to look into the budget to do that. I'm relying on the county manager and her staff to help us, because at some point we may have to make a hard policy decision to favor one program over another. And right now, body cams on behalf of law enforcement, which is in crisis across our nation right now as far as trust and transparency, we need to make that one of our highest priorities to fund it. So I'm done with my soapbox, but those are my issues, and any help I can get from staff or the county manager on finding this funding, I appreciate approving it contingent on funding, but now we need to get to finding that funding.
thank you. It will be a treasure hunt for sure, if we're going to find it within our own budgetary constraints. So, I mean, the reality of what we see in a 6-year budget. And I agree, I do agree that we should find every possible way and maybe programs that aren't, you know, working anymore or choices that we make for one versus the other. Many programs, I'm afraid, in our county, though, are not funded through the general fund. They're funded through other means. And we receive other monies for it, or those accounts are restricted accounts. That said, I agree that we should look carefully and ask for any reductions that can be made within the county, and particularly general fund issues. But it remains true that the majority of our general fund is used for law and justice right now. I think it's 80%. Is that correct, Kathleen? Something like that?
It's between 70 and 80% goes towards law and justice, and the majority of the expenses is for personnel, for people. So I know the budget office and the finance team over the last few years before COVID was really looking at priority-based budgeting for council's consideration moving forward as a way to look at this. And we did ask departments and offices a couple of years ago to identify what are mandated services by law. So it's a very, it hasn't been visited in a couple of years. I mean, we've looked at it internally because when I think of the general fund, I don't know. There's a lot of stuff that's mandated by law. There's a lot that's under other elected officials, and a lot meaning the 20 to 30% that is not in law and justice as well. And so, it might be that we have, and I can put another agenda together as we have this conversation where I can bring in the elected officials for all the general fund departments and start talking about that, because while there are mandated by law, where the flexibility is on those ones is what's the acceptable level of service under that law. So is it responding within a week, or is a month acceptable level of service? And then our other general fund areas, it is, as the chair mentioned, most of our programs that are policy, that are not mandated, are not funded by general fund. So that's something that but we can certainly share the information that we have and have that conversation also, because I think it would be fair to have the other elected offices to participate, and the elected officials, because they run their business, and we, or the council, cannot necessarily dictate how to run the business. It's only the budget aspects, but so that the council can get a full understanding of what the potential or unintended consequences or the impact that our community may see. And I can tell you, because I did ask departments last year to put forward items that they could reduce in general fund in the event that we couldn't balance coming into this year. It's really tight. It's going to affect people and services if we're going to have this, ongoing expenses of $2+ million that will increase every year, because it's all people. That will have an impact on people if we have to find that internally.
Madam Chair.
Councilor Olson.
Yeah, and I would just add that, Madam Chair, I completely agree with you. And certainly we're required, just based on the fact that we do have a different structural deficit than every other non-border county in the state of Washington, that when we look at every single year, we have to find millions of dollars in reductions and savings. That's every single year we have to go through that. We have to go through finding budget interventions. So the idea, with all due respect, the idea that we could go in, and I think you called it correctly, Chair, that it would be a treasure hunt, because we have to go through this process every year just to balance our annual budget. So we're going to have to look at definitely some difficult and hard decisions as we look at funding body cameras. And there are some options out there that I hope we have a conversation about in the future. But I know the hard work that goes into these budgets every year, and what our staff does to find savings every single year so that we can balance the budget and manage that structural deficit. So I just wanted to add that on, and we're going to have some tough conversations as we talk about body cameras. How do we fund those? But we need to have them.
Other comments? I just to piggyback on this whole discussion and what was stated earlier about our structural deficit, and I agree with Councilor Olson there that our county is completely different than other border counties because of the proximity of the availability of shopping. And those merchants know that. I mean, it is just, you know, big money, you know, purchases can be made across the river so easily. So I'm going to reiterate, I really believe that this needs to be something that we as a council, together with our legislative delegation, that we, and this will be after the session is over because they're very busy now and it would be counterproductive at this point. But after this legislative session, that we begin talking to them. We invite our finance team to help discuss this idea as well, to show them. And Gary, you're on LSC with WASAC, and that should be something that even if WASAC could get behind it, even if other counties, and maybe it could be an you know, a calculation where other counties that don't have the same kind of deficit could, you know, it would be calculated a little bit less, or it would be a fairness type calculation for what is being needs to be backfilled, because we actually receive those taxes. We just have to send too many of them back to the state. So that's one thing. And again, I really appreciate the work that's been done on this supplemental budget. It's hard to take in many ways. So anything that we can do to continue to work to reduce the county budget so that we reduce the impact on our taxpayers is certainly important. But having spent a couple, 3 years here now, the structural deficit really is something that is harmful to this county as opposed to other counties. So, and we have a lot of urban population that we serve as a county that many counties don't experience. They may be more rural, and so they don't have the same kind of services that we are expected to deliver to our constituency. Are there other comments or questions? Go ahead, Kathleen, is that you?
No, I would also just kindly ask the council, and you guys have been great with this, but to also continue the conversations with the delegation regarding unfunded mandates that come, because that also, you know, where we're mandated to do something by decisions made outside of our county, and then we have to find the funding and resources to fulfill those. So, and I know that there's been conversations on that, so I think it would be greatly appreciated as the council moves forward to continue that dialogue as well.
Absolutely. And this is something that WASAC, our Washington State Association of Counties, harps on and has been, you know, for the last 3 years as well. So a point well taken. Thank you. Other questions or comments before we leave this work session? Or we are done, right? Yeah. I see the next steps there. We're going to have a hearing on Tuesday, the 20th. Any of you that have questions or comments or need more information, I would say get that to Kathleen as very soon, because it's Tuesday that we're having our hearing. If there's nothing else in the council, we are going to take one more 5-minute break here between and we will use the same WebEx for our council time. Is that right? Kathleen, are we finished with this? Just want to make sure.
Yes, that is correct. We're done with this, and you'll stay on the same WebEx for council time.
Okay. All right. We'll see you in 5 minutes, councilors.